So today's ad slot isn't sponsored. Instead, I want to tell you about a charity I work with who could really do with some extra help right now. I'd like you to contemplate for a moment about how you feel when you're really hungry, or if you have a child, how they behave when they're hungry. Terrible, right? Hunger affects everything: behavior, mood, concentration, ability to learn. A hungry person, and especially a hungry child, isn't anywhere near their best self. Magic Breakfast provides free, nutritious breakfasts to over 1,000 primary, secondary, and ASL special educational needs schools across the UK. Every school day, they offer breakfasts to up to 200,000 children. But it's also not just about the food. I've visited their schools, and their clubs also serve as a place for children to come together, get support from teachers, catch up on homework, relax with friends, even get their hair braided. How needed is this charity? Sadly, very, and more so than ever. According to government statistics, before COVID, around 1.7 million children in the UK were living with food insecurity, meaning that they're at risk of hunger in the morning. That number is now looking closer to 4 million. And of course, with the cost of living crisis, it's just rising. I volunteer with Magic Breakfast. I'm on the development board, and I know the money goes where it's needed to supporting children, as well as lobbying for policy change to encourage the government to step in. Magic Breakfast actually always say that their ultimate aim is to make themselves obsolete, to end child hunger for good. If you have the ability to support a hungry child, please do check them out. It's magicbreakfast.com. Thank you.
And I think that that should be, if we're talking about priorities, it should sort of be your number one priority beyond anything. Should be like, what does make you happy? And it's fine if that's watching Netflix. It's fine if that's spending more time in bed. I think in this hustle culture, I think everyone feels like hobbies that aren't enriching or sort of culturally enriching or sort of money making are inherently bad. And quite often I definitely see it around the idea of reading. I see people say that reading is somehow more rewarding and more of a proper hobby than streaming TV or watching a rom-com. And I totally disagree with that. And in fact, like in terms of my writing, I'd say.
Welcome to Priorities, the podcast about the things in life that really matter. I'm your host, journalist and coach Lily Silverton, and each week, along with a roster of incredible guests, I'll be exploring how priorities inform and transform our lives, sharing mindset tips, strategies, tools, and inspiration to help you prioritize your own life. We'll be covering what we think is important and unimportant, what we'd like to work on a little more, and the moments that changed our priorities and lives forever. I hope you enjoy. My guest today is journalist and author Bobby Palmer. Bobby wrote the Saturday Times bestselling novel Isaac and the Egg, which takes a moving and memorable look at grief and men's mental health through a very unique and really quite funny lens. As a journalist, Bobby's written for publications such as GQ, Esquire, Men's Health, and Cosmopolitan, and he's also the co-host of the podcast Book Chat with Pandora Sykes. Bobby is currently writing his second book. Welcome, Bobby.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. A bit wet because I've just been walking the dog in the pouring down rain, but happy to be inside.
It's really, really pissing it down today.
Yes.
So the first question I ask my guests is, do you have a morning routine? And I imagine that maybe yours is walking your dog. Is that?
Yes. I mean, it's the weird thing about being a freelancer and being self-employed is I feel like you like to think that you have a morning routine, but I really don't. The nice thing about it is there are mornings where I really don't feel like getting out of bed, so I'll stay in bed. But I don't have to start work at 9 on the dot. But if I have a morning routine, it's walk the dog, have a very strong black coffee, and sit down and write first thing, because I do all of my best writing in the first sort of like 2 or 3 hours of the day, and I'm spent by the afternoon. And I know a lot of writers who will be like, I'll sit down at 7 in the evening and do all my writing then. But I find that very first thing is sort of my writing time, and then afternoons and stuff, that admin, emails, the boring bits.
I'm totally the same. I definitely do my best work in the morning. By late afternoon, I'm, for all intents and purposes, useless.
Yes, same.
Do you find it easy to sit down and write first thing, or do you feel you have to make yourself commit to doing your best work in the morning because you know that you're going to be sharpest then?
I find it easy. I feel very lucky that I get to be an author as a job, because it's a hobby as far as I'm concerned. Like, if I wasn't paid to do it, I would still be doing it in my spare time. So, I'm not someone who advocates working 7-day weeks. And, I feel like burnout culture is a very real thing. But in my case, because I enjoy doing what I do so much, even on a Saturday or Sunday morning, if I'm at home, I'll feel quite weird if I don't, sit down and write for a couple of hours in the morning. It's almost like a meditation. It's the same, the same way that I've never played sport or anything, but I feel like I get the same enjoyment. I retreat from the world around me and just do something that I sort of purely enjoy. So I don't actually find writing itself or sitting down to write very difficult, but I find a lot of the other stuff around it difficult, sticking to deadlines and editing what I've written on that morning.
So you find like the initial flow state very easy?
Yes. Yeah. The planning of a new book or a new story and the first draft are just like fun, just so much fun, because you're you're making up a new world. It's just like being a kid again. And then the boring grown up stuff is having to make it make sense and having to make it something that people will actually want to read.
Yeah, it's that initial thing where you get it all down and you think it's the best thing ever, and then you come to edit, you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever written. Yes,
yeah. And I don't think I've ever written anything where I haven't at one time thought it's the best thing that any human being ever has ever written, and also at one point thought that it was like not fit to be even like thrown in the bin. It needs to be burnt. No one can ever see this.
Same every time.
Yeah.
Well, clearly Isaac and the Egg does not fall into that burnt in the bin category. I loved it. I read it over Christmas, beginning of January now we're talking, and I really, really loved it. I thought it was unique and funny and weird and unexpected and emotional. It really hit me over and over again in lots of ways, lots of questions about identity, obviously a lot around grief and mental health. How'd you come up with the idea?
It's funny. There are sort of two answers for this. There's like the very high-minded literary answer, and then there's the actual answer. The high-minded literary answer is that I really admire literature that tackles grief in a sideways way, especially when it almost brings grief in as a character. So, two books that were very influential to me in writing it were Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter and A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, both of which have grief as sort of a monstrous character. So the initial idea really was, what if you had grief as a character in a book, but it was a comedy slapstick sidekick, like a little creature. The actual answer is that it was around the time that Baby Yoda was a craze. And the real idea I had was, I was watching The Mandalorian, the show with Baby Yoda in it, and I just thought this would be so good if you did a really, really serious story that tackled some really serious themes, but Baby Yoda was just there the whole time. So it all started with Baby Yoda. And then I think what was funny is when I started writing the book, it became something totally different to what I thought it would be, because I thought it would be like a black comedy about an alien and a man. And it actually became, it's not sci-fi or anything like that. It really became an exploration of men's mental health, of male loneliness, and almost the idea of the egg, the creature in it it ended up not being the most important part of the story. And I think it was really I was really happy that it went the way it went, because it became something that I'm proud of, and something that I don't feel like I've seen a lot of, in sort of in bookshops. I don't feel like I read a lot of young men's accounts of their own mental health, especially ones that aren't really, really, really literary. Yeah, I mean that was where it came from initially, and then they're obviously like I think it came naturally to me to write about young men, a young man, being a young man, but also my background is in journalism, and I've done a lot of work for Men's Health, GQ, and stuff like that. So I think it was a fairly natural world to inhabit, and I actually, being a journalist before, I thought writing fiction would be quite a strange experience, but it felt quite natural once I'd started writing, really.
Well, all fiction's grounded in reality, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I often get asked about this book specifically, like, is it autobiographical? And at its core, no. It's about someone experiencing this huge grief that I haven't personally experienced. But beyond that, a lot of the main character, Isaac, a lot of his insecurities, a lot of his fears, a lot of his quirks, all the worst bits of him are me, and it was quite a introspective writing process, because I wrote the whole thing during lockdown 1, the first COVID lockdown. So it was a really, me at my dining table, not able to go anywhere outside my house, just sort of inside my own head writing this book. So it was, like earlier, it was a meditation almost.
Like cathartic experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think all writing is, without sounding too corny, if you're writing something, you clearly have a need to get it out. And I think I'm just finishing up my second book, and I'm starting to work on an idea for a third. And I think every single one, you can look at the component parts, you can look at the characters and say, like, well, none of this is real. These are made up characters. But, every character you make, you fill with some of your own thoughts. So I think if you made a composite of all the characters I write, that would be all of my fears and hopes and dreams and problems, all sort of, if you mash them all together, you'd have a good picture of what's going on inside my brain.
Has your outlook on yourself or the world around you changed as you've moved from being a journalist to an author?
Yeah, I think so. I think the publishing world is a kinder world than the world of journalism. So it's been really nice. This sort of community you find in being an author is really nice. But I think that probably the biggest way that my outlook has changed is there's nowhere to hide when you're writing a book and it's your name on the cover. So much work goes into it by so many people, and I'm lucky to have a great agent, great editors, publicists, stuff like that. But when it's your name on the cover, it's your thing, and then everyone's going to read it and attribute it to you. So I think it's made me braver. It's made me develop a thicker skin, but I think it's also made me just happier to talk about things that I might not have talked about before. And I think as a man, that is, I feel fortunate that it has, because I think when I started Isaac and the Egg, especially, it almost pushed back against me. I knew that it needed to be I knew that it needed to go deeper into the feelings of the main character. He's lost his wife at a very young age. He's in a really, really dark place. But when I first wrote it was quite light. It was as I said, it was a comedy, and there was a lot more egg than Isaac, you could say. And it was in writing it and in the latter stages of writing it that I realized, I needed to bare my soul a bit more, and I needed to explore things that I felt like people might. I think I was worried that people might attack me for it, or people might say, what right do you have to write this story? You've got this wrong. Those sorts of things. I think it was a real insecurity, and I had to take that risk. And the most amazing thing about it being published is I haven't, no one said that to me. I've had some really amazing messages, and the nicest messages I've had are from people who've experienced quite serious grief or who've been in quite dark places and have said that the book has really helped them. And, as an author, that's the best possible thing you could ever ask for. So I think, just not being afraid. If you know you want to write something, writing it, but doing it sensitively, doing it in a way where you're putting in the work. You're not just glossing over someone else's experience. I think that's something I've definitely learned as a first time author.
If I'd asked you sort of 5-10 years ago, whether you would see yourself writing a book about grief and mental health, a fiction book about grief and mental health, what would you have said?
If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I saw myself writing a fiction book non-stop, I would have said no way. Definitely not a serious one. I really didn't know that I was going to be a novelist. I always, since I was a teenager, I've loved journalism. I was a huge lover of magazines, especially sort of men's magazines, so GQ, Esquire, Men's Health. Those were all, I read all of them every month, and that was the world I wanted to inhabit. I just thought it was so aspirational and so cool. And as a teenage boy, I think it was just like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the editor of GQ. So, I always wanted to do journalism. I studied English at uni. I went straight into journalism from there. And didn't really pause to think. And if I had, I think I would have said that fiction books especially, were written by people smarter than me. I thought it was like you had to be this shaman type, with this like amazing creative knowledge, and I think you had to almost be sort of born different to write fiction. What really changed was I lost my job, so I went freelance. In hindsight, getting into the world of magazines at the time when pretty much the entire world stopped reading magazines ended up not being the smartest move. So I went freelance. I had a lot more free time, and I started to actually be able to think about what I wanted to do. And I had an idea for a book, and I started writing it. And from the first day I started writing fiction, I knew that was all I wanted to do, like all I wanted to do. And it's still all I want to do. That was a few years ago now. And yeah, I think the realization I had was, it's not smarter people who write fiction. It's the people who end up having books published are the people who sit down and write a book and finish it, because, it's a mammoth task to write even Isaac and the Egg's not that long, but it's 70,000 words. And that's a lot of words to write, especially when you don't know if anyone's going to, like it when you finished it. But yeah, no, the idea of being a novelist would have been totally alien to me a few years ago. So I'll be interested to see what I'm doing in a few years' time.
It's that just putting in the work. I mean, lots of people have variously said it at points, but there maybe isn't such a thing most of the time as inspiration. Normally you have to start the work in order to be inspired. And it applies with writing. Sort of the more that you're writing, the more that the ideas come.
I think this idea of being a creative and it being some sort of sacred thing where, you're born a creative genius. I think that is a really unhealthy outlook. I think it does a disservice to the privilege that so many creative people have, myself included. I was lucky enough to be able to have the time to write a book, and I was in a position where I had these freelance contacts, so I could earn the money as a freelancer, but also I didn't have a full-time job, so I could fit it in. I wasn't worried about making next month's rent. So there's privilege, but also I think hard work. The idea that people who write novels or people who create great works of art just sort of sit down and dash it off, and it's because they're more brilliant than other people is just a sort of weirdly widely accepted lie. And I think everyone everyone who's remotely capable of writing has a book in them. It's just, can they, or will they be able to sit down and write and write and write, and then edit and edit and edit and rewrite and rewrite and it just takes so much work. But I think people pick up a book and they read it and they think that's you almost think like that's how it was when it first was written down, and it's not, and it's not the work of one person either. It's a book it takes years to get to that point, and it takes the input of so many people, and it takes so many rewrites. So I think that is something that I'm quite keen to dispel the myth of creative genius, because I think it can act as a real boundary to people actually trying to do this sort of thing. Because that's how I felt about writing a book before I started.
Yeah, it can be really discouraging.
Yeah, definitely, especially to people especially to people who feel like they don't fit the mold of a classic author or artist. I think if you feel like you don't have a seat at the table, if you feel like you can't write a book, then you're probably less likely to try. And I think that's not a nice way to be. Well, it's not very encouraging, is it?
Well, then I think that's very helpful advice for anyone that's listening that might think they have an idea but wouldn't know where to start. I think Bobby's advice is just right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the nice thing about writing is all you need is you don't even need a laptop, a pen and paper, a pencil and paper.
I feel like this brings us quite well onto the theme of the podcast, which is priorities. Because to some extent, in order to just get that book out, you have to make it a priority, right?
Yes.
What matters the most to you? Does it matter more that I write this book or I pursue any of the other options that are available to us?
I also think in terms of if you're making writing a priority, it doesn't mean you have to prioritize it over having a life. You don't. It's not like if you have a full-time job and you want to write a book, you have to get home and sort of never watch TV and shut yourself in a dark room and dash out thousands of words. I think you can write 1,000 words a day and have a book in a few months, have a first draft in a few months. I think it's consistency over quantity or quality. It's just, if you do a little bit every single day, it really, you can get quite far down that path quite quickly.
It's like with anything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's,
you don't want to be doing something once a month.
10,000 hours, they say, right? 10,000 hours of everything of anything, and you're an expert. I might botch that, but I think I've heard that.
And the little and often, because it's also a way not to get discouraged, because a lot of the time I see it with like goals when I run workshops and people set these absolutely huge goals and they're like, I'm going to smash this new habit and I'm going to do an hour of meditation in the morning and then I'm going to do half an hour of yoga and then I'm going to go for a run and I'm just going to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to journal. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Let's see how long that lasts. And it's like 3 days in and they're spent, because it's really hard to build that much time in. Whereby if you say, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes a day of something that's good for my mental health, then that's a much more sustainable approach, I guess.
Yeah. And a much healthier approach. I think, quite often you can set goals like that. And even if you are doing things that make you feel like a better, more rounded person, you can be a lot more miserable because you feel the pressure of fulfilling them.
Yeah. And you have to sacrifice other things like sleep or time with family or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what's the overall balance of health and happiness there?
And I think that should be if we're talking about priorities, it should sort of be your number one priority beyond anything. Should be like, what does make you happy? And it's fine if that's watching Netflix. It's fine if that's spending more time in bed. I think in this hustle culture, I think everyone feels like hobbies that aren't enriching or, sort of culturally enriching or sort of money making are inherently bad. And, quite often I definitely see it around the idea of reading. I see people say that, reading is somehow more rewarding and more of a proper hobby than, streaming TV or watching a rom-com. And I totally disagree with that. And in fact, like in terms of my writing, I'd say Isaac and the Egg especially is more influenced by, shit films essentially than by great literature. It's got a lot of rom-coms and sort of 80s sci-fi stitched into it. So I think yeah, I don't think there's sort of a cultural hierarchy. I think you can just, whatever makes you happy is enriching in its own way.
My older brother loves video games, and we had this argument as a family years ago over whether video games were just as enriching as reading a book.
In some ways, they're more enriching because you control the world you're in. Yeah. I love video games. I think they are a real form of meditation because it allows you to actually be someone. In fact, there's almost more of a parallel between books and video games than there is between books and films, because films and TV sort of lay it all on the table for you. They say, like, this is what everything looks like and this is how things are happening. Whereas when you read a book, you go inside someone's head, and when you play a video game, you go inside someone's head. So I think you could definitely argue, if you were doing a hierarchy, you could argue, books and video games at the top and films and TV beneath. But I said there's no hierarchy. So
you said there's no hierarchy.
Yeah.
So Bobby, what are some of the priorities that make you happy?
So, despite what I just said, reading is one of my biggest priorities. I think in whatever you do, you have to sort of put your money where your mouth is. And I write books, so it's not even that I feel like an inauthentic writer if I didn't read a lot, but it's like I'm a better writer for reading a lot, and especially reading a lot of contemporary fiction. You have a lot of authors. You have a lot of authors who'll say, "Oh, I don't really read modern books." I much prefer the classics. I much prefer books from the 19th century or whatever. And I find that quite alarming when people say that, because it's like, well, you're not writing then, you're writing now. There's a snobbery in that, I think, basically. And I try to read as much contemporary fiction because I want to know what people are enjoying, and I want to know what my peers are doing. And I think, I try to read across the entire spectrum. I read a lot of literary fiction, but I also read a lot of commercial fiction, which are, to be honest, two labels which don't really mean anything anyway, because the crossover is enormous. But yeah, I try to read a lot, both for my job. If I always I still find it weird saying job, being an author, because it doesn't feel like a job, but I try and read for work, and I try and read because it's when I'm most content. I think, I find great solace in reading, and I always have, the sort of running joke in my family is I come from a family of huge football fans, Luton Town season ticket holders, and my dad, for one or two ill-fated years, got me a season ticket to go to the games with him, and I used to take a book to every game and spend the whole game reading. And I think after one or two seasons, my dad said, "You don't have to come if you don't want." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll just sit at home and read instead." So yeah, I think reading's always been a bit of a meditation for me, a way of finding peace. So I try, especially now, to actually portion out time to read. And I also, this is another benefit of being a freelancer, of working for myself, is I'll actually treat reading like work sometimes. So like, I won't punish myself if it's 2 PM, and I'll go, I'm going to go read for an hour before I go and carry on work, because it is really helpful for what I do for a living.
What's a great book you've read recently?
Well, interestingly, talking about video games was making me think about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which came out last year. And I mean, everyone loves it. It's so good. And that's a book about two video game developers and their sort of friendship over the years and the video games they create together. And I think it's a brilliant book because it does almost exactly what we were saying, which is it unites those worlds of literature and video games, but you don't have to be someone who's really into gaming to read it. It's really just a great love story. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. What else have I read recently? At the moment I'm doing a lot of reading for mine and Pandora's podcast because I should probably say what that is.
Yeah, so you've got a podcast with Pandora Sykes, who was on last.
Yes.
Actually.
Yeah. So we have a podcast called Book Chat, and the whole idea behind it is that we each bring a book each month and we chat about it. But the books, the prerequisite is that the books have to be older than 2 years, more than 2 years old, because I feel like both of us, existing in the books world, we feel a lot of pressure to read, not even what's just come out, but what is coming out. You know, we get a lot of proofs of books. I've got so many books coming out this year that I feel like I should be reading, and so many books that I didn't read last year that I feel like I should be reading. And we wanted to just create this space where you can enjoy books that aren't like hugely hyped right now. So that's been a really rewarding experience. I'm currently reading Wuthering Heights, which is one of my favorite books of all time, but not something before we started the podcast I probably would have picked up and read again. And I'm really enjoying it. I love it. I think Pandora hates it, so that'll be an interesting episode. But yeah, and then, you know, over Christmas I read White Teeth by Zadie Smith and Convenience Store Woman by Saka Murata. So that's only a few years old, but that was our last episode. So yeah, I think in terms of reading across the spectrum, I think it's worth saying that I also do try, and everyone should try and read stuff that's like a few years old, because I feel like people read what's really popular right now or what they feel like they should have read, you know, War and Peace or Dickens. But there's almost a neglect of books that came out 10 years ago, which sort of had the hype's died down and they haven't made it into the sort of hallowed halls of the classics yet. So, yeah, just having a varied diet of reading, I find really rewarding, because then you get a very varied picture of lives and experiences. And I think, you know, it's the classic cliche of reading, but it's such an escape that I think always reading the same thing is less of an escape.
Do you read magazines?
No, not anymore. Which is really funny. I basically don't do a lot of journalism anymore. And almost as soon as I started writing fiction, well, actually, no, that's a lie, because I needed to make money. As soon as I got a book deal, I stopped. I was fortunate enough to stop seeking out a lot of journalism work. And as soon as I did that, I stopped reading magazines, really. And I think it's not so much that I don't like reading magazines. I still do. It's just that the time I was reading magazines before, I now spend reading books. And you know, I much prefer to read books voraciously than read magazines. But it's weird, like, as someone who aspired to be a journalist, I've never been a great reader of like long form journalism or anything like that. I get bored really quickly. So people would send me articles and I'll go, oh great, yeah, I'll read the first 3 paragraphs and then I'll skip to the end. Which is terrible. I shouldn't admit that. And I don't know why, but I think it's the same reason I don't read non-fiction books, really. Like I'm like a child at heart, and I need there to be like a story and you know, main characters, and like, who's the goodie and who's the baddie and where's the happy ending? And you know, even in very serious books, I feel like you still get that sense of narrative, which I struggle to find even in really good narrative nonfiction.
Like my daughter, who needs stories to do her numbers.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's how I describe myself. And I write everything in crayon as well.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, just pictures that you've created.
Yeah.
What's another priority for you?
A huge priority, probably my biggest priority in terms of my mental health, in terms of my sort of sense of happiness, is spending time outside. I feel like a lot of people felt that very keenly during COVID, myself included. But really, I've always really liked walking, not necessarily, going on great hikes, although I do like that. But I'm not like a mountaineer or anything. I like walking around. I've always liked, if I'm in London and I'm 4 or 5 tube stops away and it's an hour walk, I'll always take the walk, because I just find it I feel very content when I'm walking. And I also have a lot of thoughts, which sounds like a very emo, but have a lot of ideas and work through a lot of things, both professionally and personally, when I'm walking around. And I think I think being outside, whether that's in the city or in the countryside where I live now, is really, really enriching. And I now have a dog, so I am forced to walk he's very energetic, so I'm forced to walk for at least an hour every day, and it's brilliant. I love it. I love getting out and just sort of breathing in the fresh air. I've got quite into birds as well, so now I'm like trying to become an expert on birds and stuff like that. So I'm really becoming at one with nature. But yeah, I think spending time outside is probably the biggest priority for me, definitely in terms of how I feel. And I feel very cooped up now if I don't sort of get out on a day.
Well, if it's really bad weather like it is today, do you just get out?
Yeah. I like going out in the rain. I think it always feels like a more miserable thing when you're inside looking at it, and then when you go outside, and then you feel like the main character in a film when you're walking around in the rain. You feel like you're sort of Julia Roberts, or I should say something more like Wordsworth. But yeah, no, I went straight to Notting Hill.
My husband always says no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing.
Yes, there you go. The weather outside is weather.
Mm-hmm. What's another priority for you?
I don't want to say the words looking on the bright side, and I don't want to say the words finding the silver lining, but
here we are.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of myself as an optimist, and I think it's sort of baked into my nature. So I feel lucky that I have a sort of great bounce back ability. So when bad things happen, I feel like I can bounce back quite quickly and just be quite happy. And I feel like I've had quite a happy life, and I feel very fortunate to have a career that I love doing, and a roof over my head, and a dog who sometimes loves me back. So I try and see the positives in every situation, and I try and always have a smile on my face, because I think that's the way to live life. And definitely moving out of the city, and the book coming out, and being able to write books, I feel just generally positive, and like I don't sort of dwell on the little bad things. Although, you know, I say that, and then you should see me if my dog won't come inside, or if I you know, smash a cup or spill some water, and then I'm suddenly the least positive person in the world. So it's very easy for me to say when I'm sitting in my nice warm house talking to you, to say I'm always a positive person. But I think I definitely strive to be positive as possible as often as I can.
Do you have any tools that you use? Do you have any like thought processes or anything you work through, or do you feel like it comes very naturally to you, full stop?
I think something that didn't always come naturally to me, and I think this is you know, I'm wary of generalizing too much about men because I do it a lot, but I from my own experience, and I think from quite a lot of people's experiences, is men don't talk very easily. And something I've found has massively helped in terms of my general outlook is just voicing when I'm feeling angry or sad, or, you know, I have a tendency towards anxiety. I get very anxious about things, not necessarily in a nervous way, not in a social anxiety way, but I worry about things beyond my control. I worry that, you know, I'm not good enough at what I'm doing. I worry that, you know, I'm a bad writer or a hack. And I think just talking to my wife, Nina, is a brilliant listener and someone who is very, very emotionally intelligent in a way that I haven't always been. So I think just talking has really helped, you know, being able to say, like, I feel anxious and I don't know why, or I feel anxious about this thing and it doesn't really make sense. And then talking it through, I feel a million times better. So I think between that and being able to sort of walk around like a sort of old fashioned flaneur, I feel like between the two of those, I feel happy quite a lot of the time at the moment. I think it's nice to just be able to say, like, I'm happy. But I am, and I don't feel like we stop enough and say, like, I'm very happy right now. You know, you'd say to someone, "Oh, I'm feeling sad," or "I'm feeling stressed." But yeah, I feel like maybe that's a good priority, is to when you're feeling happy, turn around to whoever you're with and say, like, I'm very happy.
And as we were talking about before, it's that repetition thing where it becomes more natural if you're inclined to notice it. I talk a lot in coaching because generally when we're stressed or we're worried, we then think about how stressed we are and talk about how stressed we are or how worried we are. And then that reinforces it. So it becomes a little self-fulfilling prophecy or mantra that we're repeating in our minds over and over again.
Yeah.
And our minds don't know the difference between what we're saying to them versus what's really happening in the world. So it becomes a really entrenched belief.
Yeah.
So likewise, I guess, if we're looking out for those little moments of joy, happiness, or big moments, maybe.
Yeah. And I think it's also when you're feeling stressed, especially because I do get very stressed, especially when things aren't sort of going my way, especially when I'm writing and I really can't crack what I'm doing. I get very, very stressed. And I think it's about finding the things that stop you feeling stressed. It's quite, when you're in that situation, especially when you're feeling quite burnt out as well, it's hard to recognize when something's making you feel better. And I think it's, you know, I have it with walking the dog. It's about going, oh, I actually feel better than I did half an hour ago or an hour ago. So maybe I should do this more. You know, exercise is such a cliche one, but I find that is really great for my mental health when I'm feeling really, really stressed or anxious. You know, just going and getting my heart rate up, I will then feel like I've pounded out some of the misery.
What I'm hearing is that you have a really good connection with your internal reality, with whatever's going on for you. So it sounds like you're very good at, you know, identifying what's happening and then taking steps? Not all.
I think that comes with being a writer. I think I wouldn't have said I was always like that. Definitely not when I was working a full-time job. I think working for yourself can be really stressful, but it can also mean that you're very much in touch with even down to your own rhythms. Like if you work better in the afternoon, you can take it easier in the mornings. And like we said, if you work better in the mornings, you can take it easier in the afternoons. You don't have to fill a 9 to 5 because you do more productive work in the hours you are working when you're working for yourself, because you're not just, punching someone else's timesheet and making them profits. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say I've always been that good at understanding myself, but I definitely feel like writing and, sort of exploring the minds of other characters who might be yourself through the writing process definitely makes you more in tune with your own brain. It's almost a form of therapy, and I wouldn't advise people just write a book instead of going to therapy, but it is therapeutic, writing. And I think also just growing up, your priorities change, and I do a lot more of the little things that make me happy now. So I drink less, but I drink more like good coffee, good beer, like stuff that brings me joy. I buy nice cheese from the cheese market, like a really old man. But I think, like over the years, discovering those, finding out what getting to know yourself basically, and getting to know what brings you joy and what doesn't is very important. And I feel very like glad to have got to a point where I do sort of understand my own brain in a way that maybe I didn't as an early 20 something.
Speaking of understanding your own brain, what's something that doesn't matter to you? What's something that's not a priority?
Well, so that is exactly the sort of thing I'm talking about. I used to, especially when I worked in journalism, and I did a lot of culture stuff. So I was writing a lot about music, about film and TV, about books, and celebrities, stuff like that. I think I used to be very aware of whether I seemed cool or not, and whether my interests, especially in the cultural space, were cool. And I just don't care about that anymore. So I'm a huge, I talked about rubbish films earlier. I'm a huge lover of Disney films, Marvel films, sort of what especially in the superhero film space, what people would probably describe as like trash culture. I love rom-coms, sort of the more rubbish the better. And I like, I like listening to music. Some of the music I listen to is probably quite cool. Some of it is from musicals, and some of it is Peter Gabriel. And I think it's about I've learned to stop prioritizing whether what I'm consuming from a cultural standpoint is something that I would happily share on my social media and say, like, I've discovered this cool new band, as opposed to like what actually brings me joy. And it goes back to what we were saying about that sort of cultural hierarchy, and about reading versus film and stuff like that. I think it's just like, if I want to, if it's a Sunday afternoon and I want to read and, sit back in an armchair with a glass of red wine and read Wuthering Heights, then I can do that. But also if it's a Sunday afternoon and I want to eat chocolate and watch Pretty Woman, that's also fine. I think whatever suits you. And I think you don't need to feel like you are some cultural arbiter, some sort of like amazing, cool, on trend. I don't want to say the word on trend because it makes me sound like super, super old, but like, don't care about being trendy anymore. And I think being a journalist, you feel like you have to be trendy, but being an author, you can really relax into being a sort of fusty old man before your time.
I think both of those Sundays sound amazing, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that made it sound, that I did make it sound like Pretty Woman is a bad film, but Pretty Woman is a good film.
It's a very good film.
Yeah.
What's something you'd like to prioritize more?
I think this goes back to what I was saying about men. And once again, I don't want to generalize too much, but definitely from my own experience, I'm not very good at not even maintaining friendships, because it's not like I've sort of, shed a lot of people when they reach 30 start sort of shedding friends, and that is true. I think you lose a lot of your peripheral friends, definitely. But I think a bigger problem is not remaining as close with the friends who you are close with. So something that I'm trying to prioritize now is just messaging friends, messaging friends and saying, how are you? Which sounds like a normal thing and probably is a lot more natural. I know it's definitely more natural to my wife with her friends. They'll just say, how are you? But like, it's weird. It feels really weird as a man to message a male friend without like a reason, or to hang out without getting blind drunk being the sort of end goal. I think it's I was listening to there's an author called Michael Pedersen who did a great book called Boyfriends last year, and that's all about male friendship. And he said that this thing that absolutely fascinated me, that the idea that men can't really hang out without a prop. So whether that's like playing football or having a pint at the pub, I think it's really interesting, this sort of idea that it's like the masculine way of doing things is to sort of have like a shield of some sort between you and your friend. So I think something that I really try and prioritize now is having male friends, close male friends where I can talk to them and hang out with them without, barriers, and it just sort of being like nice friendships, where, people don't feel like they have to hide anything, and where you feel like you can actually talk about your emotions, which, for men of my generation and every generation before has felt like something that you don't do, and even myself, I think of myself as a fairly modern man who is in touch with his emotions, but it still feels quite weird to talk honestly with the men in my life about anything remotely serious. I think you're much more comfortable just cracking jokes and then talking to. I'll talk to my wife about serious stuff, but I won't talk to my male friends about it. And I think that's unfair, both because it's like sort of you're emotionally unloading on the women in your life, and then saving the jokes for the men. And I think that's a really old fashioned way of doing things. So I think just embodying a more modern masculinity, especially in terms of friendship, is something I'd really like to do. And that starts with just being able to ask your friends how they are, which sounds like such a low bar to clear, but it is, it's the first step.
Yeah, I mean, I hear this from my husband. I hear it from so many men and women, because life is really demanding as well, I think, is the other.
Yes.
Our modern lives are really demanding. And it is that idea of, okay, I can only prioritize so much. I can only put so many things first. So often friendships, as you get older, slip down.
Yeah, and I think everyone has a tendency nowadays, especially to vent, so like every conversation will be someone will message someone else, and it will be, like because they want to complain about something that's going on, and then, you know, they'll get it out of their system, and then, you know, next time the other person will message and then complain about something. And it's, you know, I think really carving that time out to just like, you know, shoot the shit, just sort of chat about nothing in particular is quite important.
Yeah, just generally being there for one another.
Yeah, and not just when you need something.
Yeah. The more monotonous day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming on from that, I'd like to end by asking you about this egg box that you've created.
Well, I didn't know about the egg box. My publisher sent it to me as a surprise, and they so my publisher Headline had published Isaac and the Egg. I think they noticed that a lot of people were coming away from the book and classing it as a book about, you know, about hope. It's quite a dark book, but I like to think it's got about as happy an ending as it can have in the circumstances. And if not a happy ending, then at least a hopeful one. So my publishers asked readers who like the book to send in messages of hope, which I have been taking out of what we've called #ThatEggBox and sort of sharing on social media. And I think especially at this time of year with this kind of weather outside, it's been a nice experience. It's brought me some hope, which is amazing. And I think, you know, having people connect with the story in that way has been really special too, because, you know, it's nice to put a smile on someone's face at the very core of it. And it's been really amazing to feel like people have connected with it on an emotional level, because all my favorite books and stuff like that, that's how I feel about them. So being on the other side of that is a really special experience.
Do you have any ones that you remember that you can say to us now?
Yes. Yeah. There was one, and I think it was a quote, although I can't remember who it was by. But it was it was sort of something like, step back and think if what's bothering you today will be a problem in a month's time. And I thought that was a really clever one, because I really worry about the little things. You know, I worry about sort of like, I'm a classic dog owner. I always like look at him, I'm like, is he acting weird today? Is he okay? Is he fine? Is he breathing? And then I'll be like, oh, I'm really worried that the car has to go in for an MOT tomorrow. And then the next day I'll be like, oh, I haven't talked to so-and-so in a while. I hope they don't hate me. And I think I have such a tendency to feel like everything is the end of the world and then not think about it the next day. So that was a nice quote to read, because I think it's something I'd love to implement, is, you know, really thinking about the bigger picture and thinking like, is this a real worry, or is it a worry for the sake of having a worry? And that quote actually ended with, then eat chocolate, which I think is also a good piece of advice.
Very good advice. Yeah, absolutely. So much of the stuff that we worry about really doesn't have any big significance on our life. And often it's actually the smaller stuff that we get very stressed about.
Yeah.
You know, you get stressed about someone cutting you up in traffic and you're really annoyed for the rest of the day. And then that impacts how you treat yourself and other people, where again, you wouldn't even remember that in a month.
I think in a lot of cases, they're sort of proxy worries. So I'll find myself getting really stressed and worried about little things like that, you know, like exactly, like a road rage incident, or like, you know, getting a stain on a new pair of shoes or something. And what I'm actually worried about is that, you know, like my book isn't going the way I planned it, or I don't feel like I've made enough money this month, or, you know, or, you know, someone in my life is having a hard time. And it's like, you almost don't have the scope and the capacity to worry about the big things. So you just put it on all the little things. So, you know, sometimes it's inescapable, but I think, just trying to think, you know, trying to take a step back and think like, what's actually making me feel like this? And then addressing it, whether that's talking to that person or going out for a walk.
Yeah, 100%. I actually wrote a column about this on my Substack about a month or two ago, which was exactly that, which was I was so angry about something and it was clearly nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
That was totally unreasonable. All right, to actually finish, you said you want to prioritize your friends more. What are you going to do today or tomorrow? What steps can you take? You want to make a little mental list of the people you want to reach out to or the ways in which you want to reach out to them?
Yes, I'm going to send at least one of my friends a message today and just say, hello, how are you? And I'm going to see a few of them on the weekend, and we're going to go swimming in a Hampstead men's pond, which is something I've never done before. But that's a nice intersection of male friendship and time outside. Not that I'm ticking boxes.
All of the sort of mental health benefits of really cold swimming.
Although I actually am one of those people that everyone likes. Everyone says they like cold water swimming except me. And I've for many years tried to make it like one of those things where I go like, oh, I feel great from it. And it's such a good thing for my mental health. And it's so refreshing. And actually I hate it. I really hate it. So I'm doing it because I'm being forced, but yeah.
I was going to say, you haven't swum in ponds before. You haven't in a while because with kids, but I used to swim in the ponds a lot. And you're choosing to swim in them for the first time in January, which feels like a really strong move.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it is probably going to be the first and last time.
Enjoy. That sounds great.
Thank you.
All right, Bobby, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Priorities, I'd really appreciate it if you could make it your priority today to hit subscribe and also rate and review, as this helps other people find it. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.